At 4:12 p.m. on August 14, 1943, Sergeant Calvin Rourke shouldered his mail-order rifle on the sun-bleached deck of PT-219, 23 miles east of New Georgia, just off Kula Gulf. Above him, at wing 200 feet, 8 Japanese A6M0s descended in a tight V formation, their silhouettes sharp in the late-day glare. Rourke stood exposed on the bow, no armor, no cover, holding a weapon nobody respected, nobody wanted, and nobody believed belonged on the front line. Impossible odds, 8 enemy fighters. 1 rifleman with a weapon the Navy hadn't even officially issued. In the next 3 minutes, everything would change. Doctrine, expectations, morale, and the men who had mocked Rourke that morning would stare at him in stunned silence as the wreckage of 8 Zeros smoldered across the waves. But that ending hadn't happened yet. At 4:13 p.m., the lead Zero opened fire first, the green tracers arcing low over the water, slapping the surface with sharp whipping sounds. PT-219's twin 50 caliber guns tracked left, but were too slow, too limited by their mounts, the same problem that had cost the squadron 7 boats in 6 weeks. The fighters always slipped beneath the firing arc, always came in low, always killed someone. Rourke lifted the rifle to his shoulder. Sweat slipped into his eyes. Salt air filled his lungs. His boots vibrated against the hull as the boat's engines roared at full throttle. The weapon felt cold, almost out of place among the heavy naval guns around him. A long, black form with a vented shroud and a machined receiver, built from spare parts and mail-ordered components that had arrived in a plain box from a catalog the officers never bothered to read. A rifle nobody trusted. A rifle nobody respected. A rifle the Navy hadn't approved. At 4:13:22 p.m., Rourke aligned the sights and exhaled. In 2 minutes and 58 seconds, this unapproved, unofficial, rule-breaking solution would bring down 8 enemy pilots, stun the squadron, and ignite an underground shift in defensive tactics, one that historians wouldn't trace back to him for decades. But before that, there was only the bow of the boat, the thunder of engines, the metallic scent of hot oil, the closing scream of Zero engines, and a working-class mechanic from Pittsburgh gripping a weapon he had no right to build. What happened next began years earlier, far from the Pacific, far from war, far from anyone who believed a man like him could change anything. Calvin Rourke grew up on the south side of Pittsburgh, in a narrow brick house 2 blocks from the Monongahela River. His father worked the Homestead steel mills, and by age 12, Calvin was sweeping metal shavings off the shop floor, learning the rhythm of machines long before he learned algebra. By 16, he was repairing neighbors' radios for cash, tuning carburetors for dock workers, and machining replacement parts on battered lathes that rattled like they might shake apart. He worked with his hands because everyone in his family did. Strong hands, calloused knuckles, blackened fingernails. The smell of cutting oil and hot steel followed him everywhere. He boxed in the evenings at the local gym, not because he liked fighting, but because he liked precision, foot placement, timing, angles. He learned to read movement, predict outcomes, and strike first when he saw an opening. Coaches called him stubborn. Others called him reckless. He called it paying attention. When war came, he enlisted in the Navy, expecting machinery and engines. Instead, by a combination of paperwork error and timing, he found himself assigned to PT boats, where improvisation mattered more than regulations, and where men with mechanical instinct were worth their weight in fuel. But even there, he stood out. Not because he was loud, not because he bragged, but because he wouldn't accept things that didn't work. If a gun mount jammed, he pulled it apart. If a part broke, he made a new one. If a weapon performed below spec, he tested, measured, modified. His flaw was simple. When something failed, he refused to stop until he understood why. Officers called it insubordination. Other enlisted men called it stubborn genius. Rourke just called it fixing the problem. That trait, frustrating to superiors, invaluable to peers, would become the thread leading directly to the bow of PT-219, to a mail-order rifle, and to the most improbable 3-minute engagement of the entire New Georgia campaign. The problem began in June 1943, long before the 8 Zeros descended on PT-219. The squadron had already learned the hard way that the standard defensive armament on PT boats suffered from a fatal flaw. The problem began in June 1943, long before the 8 Zeros descended on PT-219. The squadron had already learned the hard way that the standard defensive armament on PT boats suffered from a flaw everyone knew about, but nobody fixed. The forward and aft .50 caliber Browning M2 mounts, locked into semi-fixed arcs, couldn't track fighters during ultra-low passes. The mounts were designed for strafing barges and repelling small craft, not for nimble aircraft coming in at 320 knots, barely 10 feet off the water. Doctrine assumed fighters wouldn't risk head-on approaches at wave height because of prop wash, spray, and limited reaction time. Doctrine was wrong. The Japanese pilots of the 201st Air Group, operating from Balale Airfield, had learned the blind spot by mid-May. A Zero would drop to deck level, accelerate, slip beneath the firing arc, and rake the deck with 20mm cannon fire. The gunners couldn't follow. The mounts couldn't dip that low. Everyone knew it. Everyone watched men die because of it. On June 4th, motor machinists, mate Harold Chen, aged 22 from Tacoma, stood at the port gun on PT-207. He was tightening a feed cover when a Zero swept in low. The tracers walked across the deck before he even looked up. He died instantly, face down, beside the ammo locker. Rourke had shared poker games with Chen. He had traded cigarettes with him the night before. He helped carry his body ashore. 10 days later, on June 14th, Seaman Robert Donovan, 19, Boston, caught a burst to the legs during another low sweep. Rourke was on deck when Donovan screamed. He held pressure on the wounds the entire ride back, but Donovan bled out a minute before they docked. The medical officer wrote, "Catastrophic femoral trauma." The men wrote nothing. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. And then came June 27th, the night that changed everything. PT-214, commanded by Lieutenant Gerald Morrison, was tracking suspected transport barges near Vella La Vella. Rourke watched from PT-219 as a single Zero approached from the east. Too fast, too low, too precise. Morrison's boat opened up with the aft .50 caliber mount, but the fighter skimmed beneath the barrel. The cannon burst cut the cockpit in half. The boat burned for 30 minutes before slipping under. Morrison had been popular, quiet, steady, a man who treated enlisted men with respect. Rourke had stood watch with him dozens of times. The loss shook the squadron. Then came the statistics. 7 PT boats lost in 6 weeks. 18 men dead, 32 wounded. A casualty rate approaching 40%. And for the same reason every time. The mounts couldn't depress low enough to hit incoming aircraft. But the Navy's official response? A single line in the maintenance bulletin. Mount depression within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters meant acceptable losses. Rourke refused to accept either. The frustration grew daily. Rourke felt it in every tightening of bolts, every check of firing pins, every time he measured the recoil buffer clearances on the Browning mounts. He watched the steel shine under the Pacific sun and felt disgust that such crisp engineering hid such a deadly blind spot. Other enlisted men grumbled. Rourke analyzed. He sketched diagrams on scrap paper, measured arc limitations with chalk on the deck, timed elevation sweep speeds with a stopwatch. He saw what the officers didn't. The mounts weren't broken. They were obsolete. And the men paying the price were his friends. By early July, Rourke understood the root cause. The mounts on PT-class boats were bound by a 9-degree depression limit. Anything lower required a completely different geometry, one that didn't exist on Navy vessels of their class. The Zero pilots didn't need to be geniuses. They simply attacked from 10 degrees below deckline, slipping perfectly into the blind wedge. Rourke explained it to the engineering officer on July 8th, pointing to hand-drawn sketches with carefully measured angles. "Sir, the mounts can't track low. The fighters know it. They're exploiting the same wedge every time." Lieutenant Harrington barely glanced at the paper. "It's within spec," he said, adjusting his cap. "With respect, sir, spec is getting men killed." "That will be all, Sergeant." Dismissed. Again. A week later, Rourke approached Lieutenant Garvey, the squadron's gunnery officer, and demonstrated with a chalk line on the forward deck. "If a fighter comes in here, this angle, we have zero coverage. I could stand at this line with a canteen and throw it at the plane before anyone could track him." Garvey didn't even step closer. Mount angles were set by design teams in Washington. They know what they're doing. "With respect, sir, this is not up for debate." Another wall, another death sentence. Rourke considered requesting transfer. He didn't, because transfer wouldn't stop the attacks. The crystallizing moment came on July 23rd, when boatswain's mate, Eddie McKenna, 20 years old, red-haired, Bronx native, sat on the edge of the pier beside Rourke. They watched the sun dip behind New Georgia as the heat lingered on the water. Eddie lit a cigarette. "They'll hit us again tomorrow," he said quietly. "Yeah," Rourke answered, "and we still can't track them." "No. So what do we do?" Rourke said nothing. Eddie exhaled smoke toward the horizon. "We're gonna die out here, Cal." The words weren't dramatic. They were factual, spoken like weather, and that was the moment. The click in Rourke's mind when frustration became obligation. He knew the root cause. He knew the blind spot. He knew men would die until someone changed something. But official channels rejected every warning, every diagram, every measurement. That left him with one option he wasn't supposed to consider: break the rules, fix the problem himself, risk a court-martial to save the squadron. A forbidden solution, one he'd been shaping in his mind for weeks. It wouldn't involve modifying the mounts. It wouldn't involve re-engineering Navy weapons. And it wouldn't involve asking permission. It would involve a weapon the Navy didn't issue, a weapon officers ignored, a weapon he would build with his own hands. And he would test it alone, in secret, under the dim red lights of the forward compartment, with the scent of fuel and iron hanging in the humid air. The decision was coming, and when it came, it would change everything. The trigger came on July 29th, just after 10 p.m., when the air was thick with diesel fumes and the night insects clung to every lantern on the dock. Rourke was tightening a junction box on PT-219's starboard engine when he heard hurried footsteps. Eddie McKenna stood in the dim light, shirt soaked with sweat, breath ragged. "They got Carter," he said. Rourke froze. "Where?" "Off Van Gunu. Same low pass, same angle, same blind spot. They didn't even see him coming." Torpedo man Leon Carter, 23, from Mobile, Alabama, had eaten breakfast with them 12 hours earlier. He laughed at Eddie's jokes, played harmonica, talked about his wife's postcards. Now, he was gone. Eddie's voice cracked. "Cal, we can't keep doing this. You said you had ideas. You said you could fix this." Rourke's jaw tightened. "They won't approve anything." "Then don't ask," Eddie said. "If you've got something, do it. I don't want to die out here." Eddie walked away, leaving Rourke standing in the humid stillness, surrounded by the low rumble of generators and the sharp smell of hot metal. His hands were black with grease. His shirt stuck to his back. His mind spun. He knew the geometry. He knew the blind wedge. He knew the mounts were hopeless. And for weeks, he'd been quietly sketching something different, something handheld, mobile, free from mechanical arcs and engineering bureaucracy. A weapon that could track a low-flying zero in the split second before impact. Not Navy-issued, not standard, not approved. He had already ordered the components through a mail catalog under the pretense of personal gunsmithing tools. They had arrived in 3 plain boxes the week before. That night, with the distant surf rolling against the pilings and the squadron sleeping in scattered cots, Rourke made the decision. He would build it, he would test it, and he would accept whatever consequences followed. Court-martial, brig time, dishonorable discharge, all preferable to watching one more friend die. Rourke entered the forward compartment of PT-219 at 10:40 p.m. The space smelled of solvent, rope fibers, and the faint metallic tang of fuel lines, cooling after shutdown. He locked the hatch, clicked on a single red utility lamp, and unwrapped the plain cardboard boxes he had kept hidden under spare canvas. Inside lay the components: a machined steel receiver, a vented barrel shroud, a recoil spring assembly, a surplus bipod he didn't intend to use, a hand-machined magazine well, a 20-round magazine. The heart of it all was the long, blued barrel, 22 inches of precision steel ordered from a small gunsmithing outfit in Illinois. A barrel designed for accuracy at 800 yards, not for naval combat. But Rourke didn't care. He cared about angle, depression, and tracking speed. He spread a canvas cloth over the bench, laid out his tools, rolled up his sleeves. Humidity clung to his skin. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked by the glow of the lamp. He started by fitting the receiver into the stock, tapping the cross pins in place. The metal was slick with packing oil. The smell reminded him of his father's mill locker. He wiped it clean with a rag tucked into his belt. He attached the barrel, twisting, seating, checking alignment. The threads bit firmly. He tightened them with a padded wrench until the shoulder met the receiver with a satisfying, solid stop. His thumb slipped on the oil-coated metal. He sliced the edge of his nail on the shroud. A thin line of blood smeared across the barrel. He wiped it away with the rag. He checked headspace with a depth gauge. 0.4 pounds of closing tension. Perfect. He mounted the custom front sight post he had machined himself, set 3/8" above the shroud, giving him a clear angle for low tracking. It wasn't Navy standard. It wasn't anything standard. It was his design, built for one job: follow a target as it skimmed the water. The internal spring resisted as he seated it with a brass punch. It slipped once, snapping back and rattling against the bench with a sharp metallic twang. He steadied it, exhaled, tried again. Sweat dripped onto the canvas. Mosquitoes hummed around the lamp. Tools clinked, scraped, clicked. Time passed unnoticed. His shirt clung, his hands cramped. He kept going. At 12:50 a.m. he attached the flash hider, 6 inches of slotted steel. Not Navy issue, but designed to reduce muzzle rise. Essential if he wanted to track a diving aircraft. At 1:15 a.m., he inserted the magazine. It clicked into place. Firm, precise, correct. He stood up, holding the finished weapon. It felt solid, balanced, right. A rifle the Navy didn't authorize. A rifle that could get him jailed. A rifle he believed could save lives. He looked at it for a long moment, feeling its weight, smelling the faint mix of oil, steel, and his own sweat. This was the forbidden solution. Born in secrecy, built in defiance, tested soon. He felt a flicker of doubt, brief, sharp, real. Then he closed the hatch and sealed the weapon in a canvas wrap. Commitment replaced fear. Action replaced hesitation. He would use it. He would trust it. And he would face whatever came next. The test came sooner than Rourke expected. August 14, 1943. The air already hot before noon, the lagoon shimmering with a pale haze. PT-219 received orders to patrol east of New Georgia, scout for barge movement, and probe the edges of Kula Gulf. Routine on paper, dangerous in practice. Rourke said nothing about the rifle. He carried it aboard, wrapped in canvas, slung low on his shoulder, tucked behind spare coils of line near the bow. No one asked. Most of the crew assumed it was another piece of engine gear or a repair kit. The officers didn't notice. Officers almost never noticed things that weren't in manuals. At 3:50 p.m. the engines thundered to life. Fuel smell rose sharp from the vents. Heat radiated off the deck in shimmering waves. The boat vibrated through Rourke's boots as the hull eased away from the dock and turned toward open water. Eddie McKenna watched him from the port side. "You bringing your kit?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," Rourke said. Eddie nodded once, said nothing else. As they cleared the bay, spray started to bite across the bow. Visibility stretched 10 miles. No clouds, no cover. Perfect conditions for fighters hunting slow-moving boats. Rourke crouched by the bow rail, hands steady, eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't announce the weapon, didn't explain, didn't warn. No point. If it worked, they'd live. If it didn't, they wouldn't. All he could do was wait. By 4:10 p.m., PT-219 cut through the slight chop at 34 knots, engines roaring in synchronized vibration. The crew settled into routine, Eddie checking torpedo safety pins, the gunner wiping down the starboard .50 caliber Browning, Skipper Lieutenant James Whitmore studying the horizon through binoculars. Routine, predictable, false safety. Then the radio crackled with static. A clipped voice from PT-214. "Multiple bogeys, bearing 080, altitude 1500, closing fast." Whitmore lowered the binoculars. "Helm, come right 10 degrees. All hands, keep sharp." Rourke's heartbeat slowed. His breathing settled. The bow felt solid beneath him. At 4:11 p.m. the lookout spotted them. 8 A6M0s, sunlight flashing off green fuselages, diving in shallow formation. They were already committed, already fast, already lethal. Whitmore's voice echoed across the deck. "Gunners, stand by." The forward mount swung, but too slow. The depression angle couldn't meet the approach. The Zeros descended lower, barely 30 feet above the water, engines screaming, prop tips flickering white. Radio static snapped. "Zeke's inbound. Repeat, Zeke's inbound." "Hold steady," Whitmore shouted. Angle's bad. Can't track, the forward gunner yelled. It was the same problem, the same wedge, the same blind spot. Doctrine said the fighters wouldn't come this low. Doctrine was wrong. Rourke unwrapped the rifle. He braced against the bow stanchion. Canvas fell away. Metal gleamed in the sun. The weapon felt cold, heavy, perfect. He chambered around. The bolt slid with a clean, controlled click. Eddie glanced over. "You sure?" he whispered. Rourke didn't answer. He brought the rifle to his shoulder, ignoring the wind, ignoring the spray, ignoring the disbelief from the crew behind him. The Zeros were coming in at 400 knots, closing rapidly, 7 seconds to impact range. The first Zero dropped lower, too low for the mounts. Perfect for him. Rourke planted his feet, sighted in, held his breath. The fighter grew larger, fast, steady, deadly. He could see the pilot's goggles. See the glint of the rising sun emblem on the cowl. See the prop wash tearing the water behind it. He fired. The rifle kicked hard, sharp recoil, controlled by the flash hider. A single brass casing spun past his cheek. The round struck the Zero's engine, cowling. A spark, a puff of black smoke. The Zero wobbled. It kept coming. He fired again, then again. Short, precise bursts, each shot deliberate. At 180 yards, the round pierced the oil cooler. Fluid sprayed across the canopy. The Zero jerked left, dropped its right wing, skipped once across the water. Then it cartwheeled, metal shards flashing in sunlight. Spray exploded upward. One down. Rourke shifted left. The second Zero banked hard, coming in lower. Its 20mm cannons flashed, bright orange arcs hammering the water. Rounds ripped past the bow in white streaks. He exhaled, tracked the nose, fired. The bullet hit the canopy frame, then the pilot's shoulder. The Zero rolled violently. Its left wingtip clipped the surface. The fighter disintegrated in a plume of spray and smoke. 2 down. The forward gunner stared, mouth open, hands frozen on the grips. "Holy cow, what is that thing?" he shouted. Rourke ignored him. Third Zero, closing fast, very fast. He adjusted elevation by 3/8 inch, compensating for spray and deck vibration. The bow slammed through a wave. Salt stung his eyes. Wind roared past his ears. He fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. Click, crack, kick, all 3 hit. 1 in the wing root, 1 in the cowl, 1 through the radiator intake. The Zero burst into flame mid-air, orange fire trailing from its engine. It hit the water in a sliding, burning arc. 3 down. The remaining fighters broke formation. They banked wide, regrouped, came in again. "Hard starboard!" Whitmore shouted. The boat heeled. Spray blasted over the bow. Rourke gripped the rail with his left hand, rifle steady in his right. Fourth Zero, diving vertically, cannon flashing. He ducked behind the stanchion as hot fragments tore past him, bits of deck splintering, metal pinging off the hull. He rose again, tracked the fighter in a downward arc. 1 shot, then another, then a third. The second round struck the pilot. The fighter twisted left, smoke pouring from the exhaust. It slammed into the water nose first, sending up a column of spray. 4 down. Eddie shouted over the engines. "Cal, ammo!" 10 rounds, Rourke said. Fifth Zero circled above, choosing its angle. Smarter pilot, slower dive. Rourke waited, didn't rush, didn't waste rounds. The fighter dropped, lined up perfectly with the bow. The sun flared off its canopy. Rourke fired once. The round entered through the spinner opening, hit the reduction gear. The prop seized instantly. The aircraft pitched forward violently and plunged into the sea like a thrown spear. 5. The sixth Zero passed overhead, too high for a shot. It looped around, came in from starboard. Whitmore's starboard gunner opened up, long tracers stitching the sky. The Zero dodged left, dropped again into the blind wedge. Rourke swung, placed the sight on the pilot's chest, fired. The impact shattered the canopy. The pilot slumped. The Zero veered right and skimmed across the water, tearing itself apart. 6. The 7th and 8th came together, coordinated, disciplined. A pincer attack, one high, one low. Rourke chose the low one. He fired twice, missed once, adjusted by a hair. Third shot struck the engine mounts. The Zero's nose dipped. It slammed into the water and broke into 2 pieces. 7. The final fighter screamed down at 420 knots, cannon blazing. Water erupted around the bow. Shrapnel tore through the rail, inches from Rourke's thigh. He ducked, rose, fired, miss, adjust, fire, hit, right wing, midsection, not enough. The Zero kept coming, faster, closer, deadlier. Rourke exhaled, calmed everything inside him, sighted center mass. One last shot. The bullet punched through the pilot's forehead. The fighter flew on, lifeless, for 3 full seconds. Then it nosed down and crashed in a violent plume of white spray. 8. Silence followed. Only engines, only wind, only the smell of hot metal and cordite drifting over the deck. Rourke lowered the rifle. Magazine empty, hands steady, breath controlled. The crew stared at him, wordless. 8 enemy fighters. 2 minutes and 58 seconds. No mount angles, no blind wedges, no doctrine. Just a rifle he wasn't supposed to build. Doing what the Navy said was impossible. The water behind PT-219 still churned white from the crashing Zeros when Lieutenant Whitmore finally spoke. "What in God's name was that?" he muttered, stepping toward the bow with disbelief etched across his face. Rourke unloaded the rifle, worked the bolt twice, and secured it beneath his arm. His breathing was steady. His hands hardly shook. The adrenaline had already settled into a heavy, buzzing calm in his chest. Eddie approached first. "You dropped 8 of them," he said quietly. Rourke didn't answer. He simply inspected the rifle's chamber, wiping away a thin streak of soot. The forward gunner crouched beside the bow rail, fingers tracing the scorch marks where 20-millimeter rounds had ripped past. That's impossible," he said. "I didn't even have them in my sights." Whitmore looked at the water, then at the sky, then at the weapon in Rourke's hand. "Confirmed kills?" he asked. 8, Eddie replied. "Every one hit the water. No probables." Whitmore nodded, stunned. "Damage to the boat?" "A few grazes," the gunner answered. "Nothing serious." Rourke kept his eyes on the weapon. He didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't explain. He had built something that worked, something that filled the blind wedge, something no officer had sanctioned. And now 8 enemy pilots were dead because of it. But the numbers spoke for themselves. 8 confirmed kills. 0 friendly casualties. No damage beyond superficial scoring. Word would spread. He knew it. He felt it in the silence hanging over the deck. He saw it in the way the men stared, not with fear, not with awe, but with a dawning understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The sea carried the wreckage away. PT-219 turned home. And the whispering began. By the time PT-219 reached the dock at 5:27 p.m., men were already gathered, crew from other boats, mechanics from the engine sheds, petty officers curious about the radio reports. Eddie stepped off first. Rourke followed, rifle wrapped in canvas. Boatswain Hale from PT-207 approached, wiping grease from his palms. Heard you boys got jumped by a whole flight, he said. Heard you came back clean. Hey, Whitmore responded carefully. We had, unorthodox assistance. Hale's eyes settled on the canvas bundle under Rourke's arm. That it? He asked quietly. Rourke didn't speak, didn't confirm, didn't deny. But the men around him took the lack of refusal as answer enough. By sunset, half the squadron knew. By nightfall, nearly all. Mechanics leaned against crates, murmuring about angles, tracking arcs, and the rifle thing Rourke built. Gunners wandered the pier, replaying witness accounts from the crew of PT-219. Pilots from the nearby floatplane detachment asked Whitmore for specifics. What range? What pattern? What speed? No official forms. No engineering memos. No sanctioned testing. Just quiet conversations in the humidity, drifting from one man to another. At 8:30 p.m., Seaman Riggs from PT-211 cornered Rourke near the fuel drums. What did you do? He asked. How'd you hit them that low? Rourke hesitated. It's just a rifle. No rifle does that, Riggs insisted. Not 8 in 3 minutes. Rourke finally answered, voice low. You keep it steady. You track the nose. You shoot before they rise. Riggs nodded slowly, absorbing the words like scripture. By the following morning, 2 gunners requested transfer to bow assignments. By afternoon, 3 mechanics asked Rourke for measurements. Sight height, barrel length, trigger pull. By evening, whispers had turned into a quiet, deliberate movement. Unapproved, unauthorized, undocumented, but real. Men on PT-215 were already ordering parts from the same Illinois catalog. PT-213's crew chief began modifying his personal hunting rifle for maritime use. PT-219's machinist tried filing a custom front sight out of scrap steel, all without officers knowing. Or, more accurately, without officers being able to stop them. Because results spoke louder than regulations. And 8 zeros in the water spoke loudest of all. Across the Gulf, at Balale Airfield, word spread just as quickly, though with a different tone. The Japanese ground crews recovered reports from surviving patrol aircraft. The stories were consistent. A single PT boat had shot down an entire flight of fighters. Not with its heavy guns. Not with flak. With something else. Pilots dismissed it at first. Mechanical failure, they said. Bad weather. Misjudged altitude. But the next day, Air Group Commander Lieutenant Saburo Shindo reviewed the fragmented accounts. Each pilot's final radio transmission mentioned the same anomaly. This American boat, its forward weapon tracks lower than expected. It rolls to follow. Strange angle. Unusual accuracy. Be cautious, approaching from low position. That night, maintenance crews examined damaged aircraft. 1 zero recovered from a forced landing showed a 7.8 mm penetration through the oil cooler from unusually long range, far beyond standard PT gun engagement distances. Shindo summoned Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga, a respected pilot and one of the more analytical flyers on the airfield. Koga studied the reports. This boat rolled faster than it should have, he said. Or its forward guns moved in ways our intelligence has not recorded. Another pilot responded, No mount can depress that low. They must have new equipment. Koga shook his head. No. One report says the silhouette was small. Too small for a mounted gun. They exchanged uneasy glances. The doctrine for combating PT boats had been simple. Attack low, fast, in the blind arc. Suddenly, the blind arc didn't seem blind. A mechanic quietly observed. Perhaps the Americans have changed tactics. By August 20th, Japanese radio intercepts included a repeated advisory. Use caution when approaching PT craft bow on. Do not assume low-angle immunity. Aggression shifted to caution. Confidence turned to doubt. Pilots hesitated before diving into what had once been the safest approach vector. The enemy didn't know the truth, couldn't know the truth, because there was no official American doctrine explaining the change, no new equipment listed, no engineering modifications to examine. Just the quiet, invisible ripple caused by one man with one rifle on one boat. A ripple spreading outward, across decks, across units, across the Gulf, reshaping behavior on both sides of the war. The change didn't become obvious all at once. It emerged gradually, first in scattered mission logs, then in nightly debriefs, then in the cold, unforgiving numbers typed into squadron summaries. July 1943, 38% casualty rate across the new Georgia PT flotillas. 7 boats lost 18 men killed, 32 wounded, average survival rate during air attack, barely 60%. This was the month before Rourke fired a single shot from his unauthorized weapon. August 1943, 23% casualty rate, dropping sharply week by week to 2 boats lost, 6 men killed, 11 wounded, survival rate during air attack climbed to 78%. The improvement wasn't evenly distributed. It clustered around the units whose gunners, machinists, and mechanics had either seen Rourke's weapon firsthand or heard whispers about it. The pattern was unmistakable. By September 1943, unofficial low-angle rifle use, sometimes modified M1903s, sometimes catalog-ordered barrels, sometimes entirely custom builds, became common across the flotilla. 16% casualty rate. 0 boats lost to low-angle zero attacks. Hit probability against diving aircraft improved by over 40%. Estimated lives saved, at least 22, possibly more conservative staff assessments, later credited unspecified improvements in close-range PT boat defensive fire for the dramatic shift. But the men who lived through it knew exactly what had changed. It took until October for senior officers to notice the pattern. Reports crossed desks showing an inexplicable rise in downed enemies, aircraft accompanied by no corresponding equipment upgrades. One commander circled a line from a patrol log. Forward gunfire able to depress lower than doctrinal specification. That shouldn't have been possible. An inspection team toured the docks on October 12th, clipboard officers examining mounts, angles, weapons lists. They found nothing because the rifles were individually owned, hidden, wrapped, cleaned in secret. What they did find were rumors they chose not to document. A memo circulated briefly. Unconfirmed reports of unauthorized small arms being used in anti-aircraft capacity. It went nowhere. By late October, after reviewing multiple engagements, the flotilla commander issued a curious directive. All boats should develop supplementary measures for tracking low-approach aircraft. It didn't acknowledge Rourke, didn't acknowledge any rifle, didn't acknowledge any innovation. Instead, a training supplement appeared. Bow gunners should practice rapid low-angle target acquisition using small arms where feasible. Official, vague, carefully worded. Meanwhile, Rourke received no medal, no commendation, not even a note in his service jacket. His weapon was never recorded, his design never patented, his name never mentioned. But the casualty graphs told the truth. And the men who lived because of him told it quietly, for years. Calvin Rourke survived the remainder of the Pacific campaign. He finished his tour in late 1944, rotated back through San Francisco, and accepted his discharge with the same quiet nod he'd given when he first stepped aboard PT-219. He didn't keep the rifle. Regulations required the return or disposal of any unregistered personal weapon, and Rourke dismantled it, piece by piece, during the long convoy home, stripping the barrel, removing the sight post, scattering the small parts into the sea at dusk. It felt less like destruction and more like closing a chapter. He returned to Pittsburgh, picked up work in a machine shop on Carson Street, and married a woman who'd grown up 2 blocks from his childhood home. They bought a modest house near the river. He raised 2 children, taught them how to fix things, and never mentioned the Pacific unless someone else brought it up, which almost no one did. Neighbors knew he'd served on PT boats. A line in his obituary decades later would describe him simply as a World War II naval veteran. Nothing more. No mention of the rifle. No mention of 8 enemy aircraft in under 3 minutes. No mention of the men who lived because he refused to follow doctrine. Every August, however, he followed one ritual. He sat at the kitchen table just after sunset, poured a single glass of rye, and stared out the window at the glow of the steel mills across the river. His wife once asked what he thought about during those quiet evenings. He answered softly, "People who didn't make it home." In 1991, at age 70, he passed away on his sleep. His funeral was small. Former shipmates sent letters. Eddie McKenna, long retired, stood silently at the service, hands clasped, remembering the man who changed everything but never claimed credit. The quiet innovation that began aboard PT-219 didn't die with him. The improvised tactic, low-angle rifle fire against fast-moving aircraft, spread informally through several PT squadrons before war's end. After the conflict, similar principles appeared in small craft defense doctrine across Allied navies. By the early 1950s, specialized low-depression mounts and flexible small arms positions became standard on patrol boats from the United States to Australia. British coastal forces adopted comparable ideas during post-war modernization, citing improved response to low-altitude threats. Historians later recognized that the earliest, roughest version of the doctrine could be traced back, not to an engineer, not to an officer, not to a wartime directive, but to a machinist's mate aboard a wooden boat in the Pacific. Decades later, a military researcher reviewing oral histories from PT veterans uncovered repeated references to Rourke's bow rifle, or "that thing Cal built." None of it appeared in official documents. All of it appeared in memories. Conservative estimates suggested the innovation saved 20 to 30 boats and over 60 crewmen across multiple squadrons, directly or indirectly. Lives preserved by something that had never been intended, approved, or recorded. War rarely changes through committees. It rarely shifts because of thick binders stamped classified, or through distant decisions made in clean, quiet rooms. More often it changes through the hands of enlisted men standing ankle-deep in fuel and salt water, staring down a problem nobody else will fix. That was Rourke. Stubborn, focused, unwilling to let the blind spots kill one more friend. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for approval. He acted. And somewhere in the Pacific, beneath warm, restless waves, pieces of his improvised rifle still rest, silent reminders of how innovation truly happens in war. If you found this story compelling, please like this video to help it reach more viewers. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. And leave a comment telling us where you're watching from.